Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Marley and I read a lot. So today, as you can see from the title, I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up where I discuss all of the books that I read in the month of January, and I tell you my rating and a little plot summary and whether I liked it or not. And as always, I'm going to be talking about the books in the order from my least favorite to my favorite, so you'll definitely want to stick around to the end to see what my favorite book of the month was. But without further ado, let's get into it. So coming in at my least favorite book of the month, it was actually Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, which probably comes as a big shock as that is such a popular book on booktube right now. But you can see my journey with that book and with some other romance books in a video that I will link to. That is where I read 3 super hyped romance books, so definitely check that one out. But I rated this one 3 stars. So the premise of Get a Life, Chloe Brown is that it follows this woman, Chloe, and she has I always struggle with saying it, fibromyalgia, which is like a chronic pain thing, and she just is the type of person who also like doesn't take a lot of risks and plays it pretty safe. So when she has a near-death experience, she makes her own little get a life list, which is kind of like her bucket list of things that she wants to do to get a life, and one of those things is moving out. So she moves out into this new apartment building where she meets this man named Redford, who is the superintendent of the building. And they immediately butt heads as they have some misunderstandings that happen, and then Chloe's humor is rather like abrasive and like sarcastic, so it takes Red a little while to like understand her. So they have a little bit of like an enemies to lovers thing, but then they start to have that romance heating up. So it's a romance novel. It's an adult romance novel, if you didn't get that. Unfortunately, this was not a fave for me. I found that the romance moved along quicker than I liked them to. I like there to be a bit more of a slower burn, a bit more of a build up and reason behind their attraction to each other. And I just found that this book got steamy a little too quick for me. As you'll see in that romance video, I also discovered I don't really love reading about romance or steamy scenes from a guy's point of view, which this book also has, as you see Chloe and Red's POVs. So not a fave for me, which I was really disappointed about because I was so excited to read this book after everything that I heard about it, but unfortunately, it was just not for me. Another book I read this month and I ended up giving 3.5 stars out of 5 was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. This was also featured in my Rating 3 Hyped Romance videos, and again, it is an adult romance book. So we are following this woman named Stella. She has Asperger's, and one of the things she's really passionate about is her work. She's like obsessed with her work. She works even on the weekends and really isn't on a great path to like finding her husband, finding her life partner, and she's finding that she's having pressure from her parents to do that. She ends up hiring this male escort to help her learn how to be a better partner romantically, and so that's mostly in terms of like sexual performance and also just being in a relationship and the other aspects of it. So it's a pretty cute and unique story. It's sort of like a gender swapped version of Pretty Woman, as we have the rich, successful woman. Hopefully you can't hear my cat freaking out over there. So you have the successful woman who ends up needing a male escort, and then they fall in love. So it's a pretty cute story. I did enjoy parts of it. However, I did have a similar issue that I had with Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Sorry, I just had a phone call, so I forget what I was saying, but I think I was talking about The Kiss Quotient, and I didn't end up enjoying it as much as I wanted to, similar to Get a Life, Chloe Brown, because it just was a very steamy book, which so many people out there enjoy, but I'm learning that I am not one of those people. But it was a super cute book. If it sounds interesting to you, I still would recommend it. Next up, coming in at 3.5 stars out of 5 is Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas. So as you guys can probably recognize, this is the 3rd book in the Throne of Glass series. I read this, I think it was my first book of 2021 actually, and I read it for the 12 Days of Bookmas Readathon, which I'll put a link to somewhere as well to my vlog. But if you guys don't know, Throne of Glass follows this this famous assassin, Selena. At the beginning of the Throne of Glass book, she is actually captured, and the king actually gives her like a proposition that she can take part in this competition to work for him, and then I think like if she wins and works for him for a certain amount of time, she'll get her freedom back. So it's kind of like a Hunger Games-esque thing where like there's a lot of like training and then there's like a competition, and that is the initial book, but the series really progresses and takes a lot of plot turns, so I can't even really describe what Heir of Fire is about, but a lot of stuff changed in this book. We had a different setting, we had a lot of new characters and new points of view, so it definitely took me some time to adjust to these changes, and there were a few things I didn't love. One of the new points of view I found to be rather boring for at least half of the book. Yeah, I just found there to be a lot of boring parts, and since this is such a long book, that obviously like sucked. So I found this to be a little slow and too long, but by the end I was really enjoying it. I was finally really invested in all of our storylines and like the cliffhangers that happened. So I am excited to continue the series, but I also am a little bit apprehensive about those things that I mentioned. So another book I read this month was The Cousins by Karen M. Mcmanus. I read this one again for a vlog. It was reading 2 of my anticipated releases, so I'll link that as well. But if you guys are not familiar with Karen M. Mcmanus, she wrote the popular series One of Us is Lying and One of Us is Next. So this is sort of similar, as it is also a YA thriller mystery book. This time we are following 3 cousins. The cousins' parents all were disowned by their mother when they were young, like I think in their early 20s, and they never knew why their mother and the cousin's grandmother had disowned them all those years ago. They apparently did something and they didn't know what. So now the cousins are all about like 16, and they hear from the grandma inviting them to go work for her for the summer. So it's a mystery of like, why does the grandma suddenly want to have a relationship with her grandchildren after all of these years, and why did she originally disown their parents? What did her parents do? So it's a mystery, and it was pretty good. Again, it wasn't like standout. As I've said before, it was pretty similar to her other books, as it has very tropey, cheesy sort of characters, but it still had some very good twists, and the twist at the very end definitely surprised me. I would recommend this if you are into the YA mystery genre, or if you enjoyed Karen's other books. I thought it was a very quick, easy read if that's the sort of thing that you are looking for. Next up, I read that's the wrong one. Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. So this is the first book in a trilogy and the first book in the Grisha-verse world that Leigh has created. It's being adapted to a Netflix series. So that is why everyone is trying to read the books leading up to the series. I will link the read along that I'm taking part in that a bunch of booktubers are hosting. Basically, we're reading a book every 2 weeks. So I read this first one and I gave it 4 stars. Basically, it's a very classic YA fantasy book. I think this first one came out in 2012, so it definitely does feel a little bit dated in the way that there's a lot of familiar tropes, and there's nothing too unique or original, but it's still really fun. Basically, we're following our main character, Alina, and she lives in this like fantasy world. Like, it's high fantasy. It doesn't take place in our world. There are these things called Grisha, which are people who have powers. There's a bunch of different types of Grisha, and of course Alina never knew that she had powers, and then suddenly in a life or death situation she discovers she does have powers, and she has a very like special kind of powers. So then she goes to like the kingdom and starts training under this man called the Darkling, who's like the most powerful Grisha, and she starts training to try and like work with him to save the world. I think that sums it up. So as you can see, it does sound pretty like YA classical. So the downfalls of this book is that the world is very complex. There's a lot of different words that I've never heard of before, that I don't even attempt to pronounce in my head because they are very like weird words. Even now, after reading the second book, which you'll see me bring up next, I still don't fully comprehend everything going on in this book, and I can't remember what all the words mean in this book either. So that was something that was a drawback in this one. However, as I said, I do find a lot of the like YA fantasy tropes to be very entertaining. I haven't been reading much fantasy lately, so it really does feel just like a throwback for me to when I used to read it when I was around the age of like 13. Basically, I enjoyed this book. moving on. So next, as I hinted to, we have Siege and Storm, which is the second book in the series. I think I like this one better. So as I said, you do start to understand the world a little bit more in this one. Still don't fully understand all of the words, but you know, understand better. We also get to have new characters introduced, a lot more like side characters that are more fun, specifically a certain character that I really liked. And if I read this back when I was 13, I probably would have been obsessed with. Yeah, I just found there was like more characters in this book, more drama. There definitely isn't any like ship that I'm obsessed with in this series, which is kind of sad because I love to have, you know, my ships that I'm obsessed with that are my OTP. This series doesn't really have that for me, but I see why maybe for other people you guys could find a favorite ship in here. Actually, no, it's not really. It doesn't really have great ships, but it's more about like the plot. So I think that this book was better than Shadow and Bone. Because of that, I am excited to get to the third and final book because I assume everything will, you know, come together and be great. So that's that. Next up, we have the Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren, and I also gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This was the romance I enjoyed the most in that reading romance books vlog that I had. This one had many great elements. We're following our two main characters. I think their names were Olive and Ethan, if I'm remembering correctly, and basically they do not get along. They know each other because their siblings are getting married, so they have met many times over the years, but they pretty much like hate each other. At the wedding, they end up being the only two people who don't eat the buffet food and don't get like food poisoning. So they are asked by their siblings to go on their honeymoon that they can no longer go on as they are too ill. So Olive and Ethan decide to go on this free trip to, I think it's Maui. You know, they plan to go on this trip, not really talk to each other, just kind of have their own vacay. But of course, that's not how it happens. They end up having to fake date or actually pretend to be married in order to not get kicked off of this trip because it's meant for a married couple. While they're there, they run into some people that they end up wanting to also fake date for, you know, there's an ex that they want to impress, that kind of thing. And so they just get closer with each other and realize that they don't actually hate each other, and it was just all kind of like misunderstandings. But it is such a cute novel. The first half of the book especially, I was loving all the tropes I mentioned. The banter was really cute, and I just really like seeing the development from hate to love. The last half of the book was not quite as good for me, and that is why I did take away 1 star. Overall, a really enjoyable romance, and I really hope to find more romances like this one that had, you know, like one sex scene. It didn't go too overboard, and that is the type of romance books that I would like to read going forward. Then we get to my favorite book of the month, and that was Layla by Colleen Hoover. No surprise, as Colleen Hoover is a queen. I read this book in the same vlog as The Cousins, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Here's what it's about. We are following our main character, Leeds, and he meets this woman named Layla, who immediately catches his attention, and they fall deeply, madly in love. They have so much passion in their relationship instantly. And then when an accident happens where Layla is severely damaged, her brain is very damaged, so she is no longer the same after that, and the relationship, you know, is sort of suffering. So Leeds ends up taking Layla back to the place where they first met, which was at this bed and breakfast, which is now abandoned. So it's like an abandoned house that they're in, alone together, and then creepy things start happening, paranormal things start happening, and Layla starts acting extra weird. I can't quite remember what else the synopsis mentions, but that's, I think, all I really want to say about it. I will just say it's a paranormal romance. So if you like romances, or if you like thrillers or like creepy books, I would recommend this book. I feel like it has the best of both worlds, similar to Colleen Hoover's popular book Verity that had romantic and thriller vibes. This is honestly the same. If you liked Verity, I have faith that you'll probably like this book. It does get quite weird, as a lot of people say, and I've heard some people not really liking it, but I absolutely loved it. We had multiple plot twists throughout that really shocked me, and I just felt like it was a really unique story, at least to me. So out of all the books this month, I would definitely recommend that one the most. But, you know, I enjoyed a lot of the books I read this month. Actually, looking at it, I had no 5 stars. So actually this wasn't one of the most successful months for me, but I have faith that, you know, things will get better throughout the rest of the year. I read 8 books, but a bunch of them were fantasy books, so they were bigger. I still feel good about the number of books I read. Hopefully the ratings can go up in future months. Now that I'm realizing that. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe and also leave me a comment on your thoughts on any of these books. Are you guys participating in the Grishaverse read-alongs that are happening? Are you excited for the show? Let me know. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.